Thanks, Lance, and thank you for being here, everyone. I really appreciate it. There's definitely a big push right now to increase the amount of investment in rural places to deliver broadband services and actually also to deliver voice services. Lots of folks are claiming their RDOF money and putting fiber in the ground and things like this, and kind of residential broadband is maybe the main trigger for that. But to be eligible for RDOF funds, you also have to deploy and deliver voice services to those same customers. And actually, Ribbon is kind of one of those unique vendors out there that has lots of solutions in the residential broadband space and lots of solutions in the voice space as well. So we'll be touching on both topics today and how to deliver those kinds of services to rural customers and make use of the RDOF money that a lot of people have won. So our topics for today, we'll talk about a little bit about the big investment that's going on right now in the area of rural broadband and rural telecom services. In particular, for the broadband services part, we're going to talk about, let's call it the backbone network for those services. This is the network that provides backhaul from the access to the internet site and what people should be looking for in that kind of a solution. Residential broadband, though, is just the beginning. There are other kinds of wireline services that can be placed over this same infrastructure. We'll touch on those a little bit. And then my colleague, Greg Zweig, will focus on how you can easily add voice services to the same environment as well. And finally, we'll touch on how Ribbon is here for you with your fiber to the windmill project or whatever it is you happen to be doing. So just a little bit about who Ribbon is. We do lots of things. I alluded to earlier, we have a very strong voice portfolio, which is sort of the classic Ribbon portfolio where we deliver voice solutions to tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, all kinds of service providers all around the world. Actually, in the U.S. here, there are 500 regional and rural providers have counted on Ribbon solutions, and everything we do is supported by our USA-based tech support staff. We also have, say within the last year, Ribbon acquired a company called ECI Telecom, which is where I came from. And so now there is a very robust IP and optical networking portfolio that is also under the Ribbon umbrella. And you can see some logos there on the right-hand side. And these are examples of smaller operators that we've served here in North America. If you're not familiar with Ribbon for IP and optical networking, we have a very modern, very complete portfolio of in-house developed solutions. We're an unusual company. We make routers with a full-on IP MPLS stack that we made ourselves, and we do full, ROADM equipment as well. So we kind of have a very broad portfolio. Most of our deployment has been historically outside of North America, just for historical reasons. But we got tens of thousands of nodes deployed to some of the largest carriers in the world, serving a number of critical applications. But for deployments here in the U.S., we have USA-based services and support. So it's a little bit about who we are. Yes, sir.
Can I just encourage you? I don't know if you can bring the mic just a little closer. You just sound like you've recently picked up a heavy smoking habit. So
Thank you, Greg. Well, actually, I have picked up a heavy smoking habit, but I will also try to move the microphone closer. I hope that is better.
We'll see, but go ahead.
Okay. All right. Let's move on with today's topic then. Now, talk a little bit about who we are. There's just a huge investment that's happening now and going to continue to happen to support rural broadband. And there's just tremendous needs out there. And we've all seen this with our various different COVID experiences of working from home or watching Tiger King or whatever it was we were doing last year. But things like cloud gaming are rolling up. Telemedicine is becoming more and more important now that people are discovering you can actually do these things. Education will continue to be more and more remote. And I think in the U.S., there's an increasing sense that the digital divide that has occurred is just not something we can stand anymore. There's too much talent. I come from a very small place, actually, in rural Iowa. Lots of smart, hardworking people, for example, in my hometown, and delivering broadband to those places is just good for the country. It's good for everybody. And fortunately, lots of interesting enablers going on right now. There's regulatory enablers. Everybody knows about the RDOF program. There's another program that's coming that hasn't been fully defined yet, but that's called the 5G Fund for Rural America, which is targeting something like $9 billion, nothing to sneeze at. A lot of service providers are also making use of relatively inexpensive CBRS spectrum for last mile access or some sort of mobile service. Number of state and local initiatives in addition to the federal initiatives, and something called the Emergency Broadband Act. So it's an interesting time. There's this huge need that people recognize, lots of enablers, and there's lots of technology enablers as well that we'll touch on. So for kind of the IP and optical portion of the discussion, like I mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about the backbone network or the backhaul portion of the network. Lots of times when folks think about residential broadband, sort of naturally we think about last mile access, and we think about maybe a PON system or a fixed wireless access kind of system, or even the fiber itself. But the next important thing after the last mile access is how do you get all that traffic back? How do you aggregate those access networks, bring that traffic back across the backbone to the internet and all where the applications live? And there's lots of technologies and tools to choose from. And yesterday's needs are very different than the needs that are going to be occurring now. So people are taking a fresh look everywhere at kind of the best technologies for that kind of backbone. To deliver a great backbone, you got to really think about 4 different things in particular we're going to highlight today. Well, first of all is scale. How do you build a backbone which can deliver the kind of capacity and distance that some of these new networks are going to require? Secondly is building a backbone that can excel at delivering different types of traffic. Today's internet is not the same as yesterday's internet. There's lots of different applications that run across it, and the ability to traffic engineer the backbones can be very important. Operational simplicity. A lot of rural providers don't have a big operational staff. They can't afford something complicated. It's got to be simple, and it's got to be ready for the future. Residential broadband is just the beginning. 5G is coming even in rural areas. Business services and so forth. So our advice is build it once and build it right. So let's start in a little bit talking about scale, capacity, number of speeds, and sites. This crude drawing here on the left really talks about the way broadband has been delivered in the past. Relatively lower speed DSL or 1G PON kinds of access. And some of those access platforms themselves, if you're not building a very large network, you can actually build a backbone right out of the access platform. And a lot of folks did this. It worked pretty well for let's say, for smaller networks. But what we're seeing now, this is an example on the right. This is a kind of a simplified version of a network we just deployed with a customer of ours, where the scale in terms of the bandwidth was much, much greater. It's 10 gig PON instead of 1 gig PON. They're trying to bring traffic back to a couple of internet sites. The geography is different. So it really is important then not to try to take your access equipment and use that access equipment to build a backbone network. You really need to, because the technologies are different, you really need to look at backbone optimized kinds of technologies for kind of doing it right. And that's where we see a lot of folks moving. And I'll go the right direction with my PowerPoint here, and here we go. So let's talk a little bit about what folks are doing to scale in terms of capacity. And this is where the price of 100 gig optics, 200 gig optics, really coming down and really changing the way people build things. In the old days, people would take multiple 10 gigs and maybe even run multiple 10 gigs over multiple fiber pairs, where they take multiples of 10 gig and do some sort of simple passive WDM or something like this. But what we see folks doing now is going to 100 gig or 200 gig and just connecting those backhaul routers directly together. It's very few pieces of hardware, conserves your fiber. It's very plug and play. And you can actually get 200 gig E for pitching horseshoes, just a little more than the cost of 100 gigs. So you get some future growth capability as well. Lots of folks moving in that direction. But scale is not just about more bandwidth, although that's often the first thing people think of. Scale is often about dealing with distance. Internet POPs, especially in small places, are not always conveniently located, and oftentimes they are more than 40 to 80 kilometers away. especially if that backbone needs to provide any sort of diversity to guard against fiber cuts. So in the picture there on the right-hand side, you see, okay, maybe the short side of your diversity ring to connect the access to the internet, maybe that is less than 40 kilometers. Maybe that's no problem. But where the fiber route is, sort of on the diversity side, sort of literally goes around the barn and can be a couple of 100 kilometers. So you can't do very long distances just by, I mean, you could. You just stack a bunch of Ethernet routers and switches all the way around the long side of that network, but that's prohibitively expensive. So you need some sort of photonic or optical layer technology. In particular, you need optical amplification to achieve the distance. And there's interesting things now available in folks' technology toolkit to do optical amplification in a relatively inexpensive way. The easiest to describe is now today's IP platforms often come integrated with amplifiers, and that's very, very cost effective, especially if that network is only maybe a single 100 gig or a 200 gig, something like that. You can cascade those amplifiers to reach hundreds of kilometers, and you can manage it all as a single router platform with this basic optical amplification capabilities. That's really good for small operators who don't want to deal with two different kinds of technologies, two different kinds of equipment, but they have a significant distance problem to solve, and you can do that very cost effectively. The other place that we see people actually moving toward ROADMs. Historically, rural operators maybe didn't deploy a lot of ROADM technology. That was kind of for the bigger players, the tier 1, tier 2s, those sorts of folks. But ROADM technology has actually changed a lot in recent years. For companies who need to scale beyond a single 100 gig or 200 gig or just sort of be future-proof. The ROADM layer is fully automated, of course, but these new technology options really, really lower the cost and the size, the physical size of these kinds of solutions. Things that used to take a third of a rack for the early tier 1 ROADM deployments, you can now get those things down to a single card. So it makes it very cost-effective, easy to own, yet has all the forward-looking automation benefits that a service provider may want. So we see actually lots of rural operators starting to move toward this technology set really for the first time. Okay, so that was talking about scale, capacity, and distance. Let's switch gears a little bit. We're still talking about our broadband backbone. We'll talk about the different traffic types that often go across such a backbone. There's internet-based entertainment. I'm watching Netflix or whatever, and it's got some kinds of characteristics, latency okay, some losses okay, and I really want to oversubscribe that. But things that I don't want to oversubscribe are things like gaming, where latency is very critical. Actually, customers will pay for special gaming connections if there's teenagers at home who like to be successful at their game. The parents will pay for that. Distance learning has its own needs, and telehealth has its own needs, like encryption and privacy in particular. So it's not just one kind of network anymore where people are looking at AOL or whatever they used to do 10 or 20 years ago. It's a multi-service kind of network, so you need some sort of traffic engineering that goes across that backbone. And traffic engineering, if you're not familiar with it, is the ability to, let's say, reserve and allocate network resources appropriately for the kind of traffic that it's going to be carried. So you can have a single backbone with multiple kinds of traffic engineered tunnels, let's say. And these connections can actually be denied if the network can't support it. So you can be sure that if connection is admitted, you'll get the quality of service characteristics that the application requires. A couple different things in the toolkit. Segment routing with traffic engineering is kind of where folks are going for the future. It's a very router-like approach, but much better traffic engineering than has been possible in the past. Folks who are doing things in the very short term and the near term often use a technology called MPLS-TP, and it's a packet-based service, but the tunnels are completely traffic engineered, and actually they're provisioned, especially in the case of MPLS-TP, they're provisioned like transport circuits. So if you're an operator or you're helping an operator put up packet connections, but they're kind of like almost say sonnet people in that operator, MPLS-TP is a very interesting solution for folks like that, because you can just kind of point and click and get pipes set up and torn down, even though they're packet pipes. And of course, with optical, you can do some traffic engineering as well. So lots of different things to think about. We'd be happy to help you with the best way to do that. Let's touch briefly on operational simplicity as our next topic. This is a huge deal, especially for rural operators. A lot of rural operators that I talk to haven't deployed maybe full-blown MPLS networks. Let's say some of them just go with a simple provider bridge network, which is not a bad network, and the reason they do that is for operational simplicity, because historically, traditional Ethernet and IP routers require a lot of specialized knowledge. You have to have very smart, very highly paid craftspeople to type command line interface and get the router to do what it's supposed to do, and that just doesn't scale well for a rural operator in particular. The approach that we advocate at Ribbon is something called automated IP, where you sort of simplify the provisioning and the operations of it. Your craft people don't need specialized knowledge. There's just a GUI, so you can use a lower cost technician. Anybody, even some of our customers who are utilities moving to the UTelco kind of arena, that utility operations person, he may understand electrical substation equipment, and he may be the same person who has to understand a switch router, and you can't really learn both. So if we make it really simple on the switch router side, pretty much anybody can operate that kind of network. So that's very, very important. And another aspect of operational simplicity, and this is a big deal we see for folks in the rural space increasingly, is the idea of being able to very fine-grained management and monitoring of the fiber cable asset itself, especially if you're moving services to more and more remote places. If something bad happens out there to your precious cable, it can be really hard to find the problem. It can be very time-consuming to fix the problem. So what people have done historically, they use a device called an OTDR, an optical time domain reflectometer, and historically, it's like a handheld device that a technician carries to the field, plugs it in the fiber, it shoots light down and says, aha, here's where my failure is, and then you go fix it. It works, but it's not automated. So with a network OTDR, which is the kind of solution we advocate, that OTDR is now integrated with the network. It can actually operate in service alongside existing networks. You don't have to build a network using our equipment. If you build a network already with somebody else's stuff, having a problem with fiber health management, you can put a network OTDR in right alongside it, and it works just fine. And it's fully automated. You can detect actually degradations before they become failures. And then if there is a failure, you can locate that failure to within just meters of where it happens, and you don't have to drive up and down the cable looking for where some guy shot your aerial cable with a shotgun, because that can be very time consuming. So we see a lot of folks moving to adopt that kind of solution. And then finally here, as I'll get ready to wrap up, and we'll turn it over to Greg shortly, residential broadband is kind of the key motivator, but there's going to be more than that that's coming. So one of the next key opportunities is going to be transport for 5G. And you may look at that and say, boy, that's a little funny. This is a rural place. 5G is not going to be such a big deal. Actually, going forward, it is going to be a big deal. There's lots of deployments of mobile technology, for example, along interstate highways and other places like that, and there are going to be advanced applications that take place, not this year, but, maybe next year and the year after. And there's money to be had to expand that 5G coverage. So you want to be sure that when you put in that backhaul network, it can be really, really good at transporting 5G for your mobile operator customers. And transporting 5G is very different than transporting 4G, because 5G services are very diverse, as represented by this picture on the right. There's 3 different kinds of services. They're all going to be there over time. So backhaul network must support some sort of what's called a network slicing capability to provide traffic isolation among all those services types. We don't have time to get into that today. That's a topic in and of itself. But be aware that when you buy a backhaul network for residential broadband, it needs to be able to do this too, because you can't afford to build that backbone twice. And finally, great broadband needs great customer support. Boy, every time I talk to a rural operator, I see this over and over again. They say, yeah, we like your equipment, we like the solutions. How are you going to support us? And the key is having a North American-based team where you're getting help with the first time somebody calls, you're getting a direct connection to somebody who actually knows the equipment. Integrated project management capabilities. Network staging is a key function that lots of our customers like, where we stage all the equipment in our lab here in the U.S., turn it up. Yes, it works, and we ship it out in that kind of configuration. So having 24/7 USA-based support is a huge issue for our customers. And by the way, our lab right now happens to be in Fort Lauderdale, so if you live in a cold part of the country and want to come visit our lab sometime this winter, you are very much welcome to do so. So finally, great broadband needs a great backbone. We talked about scaling, capacity, and distance. We talked about traffic engineering for all different traffic types. We talked about operational simplicity and building networks that are ready for the future. With that, I think we'll shift gears here a little bit, and I'll turn it over to my colleague Greg, who will talk about adding voice capabilities to these kinds of networks.
Thanks a lot, Sam, and thanks everyone for joining us this morning. As a matter of fact, I live in Boston, so Sam, I may have to come visit the lab at some point in the near future. So, Sam correctly touched on the importance of the broadband environment in terms of, the long-term strategic value. I mean, if we look at the whole RDOF experience, the whole idea behind it, obviously, is to be able to deliver rural broadband. But in addition, when you look at the RDOF requirements, one of the key requirements is that you, as a provider, be able to support residential and business voice services. As a matter of fact, voice services is a requirement. But I think it's important when you peel back the onion and look at what they mean by voice services. It's more than just the ability to make phone ring, obviously. It's the ability to provide all of the other services that go with that, things like 911, CALEA, which is law enforcement, the ability to resolve the issues with robocalling or nuisance calling, directory services, the ability to move numbers. If somebody wants to port a number in or out. All those kinds of services have to be delivered as part of a voice solution. And what we're going to talk about for a few minutes today is sort of how Ribbon can allow you to deliver that in a comprehensive but rational package. And what we've done is created a solution we call Ribbon Voice Sync, which is really a platform that delivers residential phone services, business phone services, IP interconnect, which basically means the ability to connect with your peers, the other telephone providers. Also security services, because obviously when you're going to connect into people's homes and businesses, it needs to be secure. And then tools in order for you to be able to connect with the modern collaboration tools like Microsoft Teams or Zoom Phone or RingCentral or any of those players. So the first step in this environment is really the ability to provide residential services. And for those of you more familiar with the broadband side of things and maybe a little less with all the telephony environment, there is sort of a broad set of residential services that are typically provided or required in some cases by Public Service Commission. And the key thing to appreciate about Ribbon is, our heritage in this space goes back decades. So we understand what's required, and our platforms, even though they're modern and based on the latest software, we've been doing this, as I said, for decades, and we automatically provide these services as part of any platform we provide. So you don't have to sit around and wonder, well, do I have the right packages that are required to provide residential telephony services in my region? It's all part of our standard offer. And really the same can be said from a business perspective. We're very focused on SIP, which is the industry standard for both peering and for residential services. We have solutions for SIP trunking. So, yes, we can provide things like unified communication services directly from the platform. But if you have customers in your region business customers in your region who are very anxious to hook up because, and it's a big problem, as you know, They have lousy broadband today, and they're excited to be able to finally have a robust solution that you're going to be offering. You're also giving them a robust solution for them to be able to connect an existing PBX type product, a office phone system, into their environment. And we can layer on top of that call routing rules and the unified communication services that they may need to run their business. So you really have the choice. You can deliver a hosted environment where all they need is a soft client or a Teams client, or you can provide integration with existing assets. And the way we do that is with a platform we call Ribbon VoiceSync. And Ribbon VoiceSync is actually a new product within Ribbon. It's actually made up of multiple existing assets that Ribbon had. We've combined those together into a virtual software environment that's ideally suited for smaller deployments. 100% software. You can pick the hardware platform. We have multiple options, fully virtualized. But basically what we've done is combined our element management systems, which are the pieces we use to manage our platforms. We've combined those together. We've created a solution that provides built-in Class 4 routing and interconnect, so the ability to connect up to the Verizons and Bandwidths and other big Class 4 providers. We have a whole set of media server services. We have voicemail. We have all the residential and business features we talked about. And then we also layer in one of Ribbon's session border controllers so that you get security both from an access and from a peering. So if you think about it, both northbound and southbound sides of a phone connection are secured. We deliver all of that together in kind of a common package. We call that Ribbon VoiceSync. What's great about it is since it uses a whole series of existing Ribbon elements, it's all proven. I mean, things like our application server, which is at the heart of this, we have 30 million seats of that sold. Our session border controllers are deployed millions and millions of sessions all over the world in the largest tier 1 carriers. Our Ribbon services and support people, Sam touched on this, right? They all know how these things work. They've been working on these products for years, but because of virtualization and because of how technology has changed, we're able to deliver that in a much smaller footprint than we could have 5 or 10 years ago. And the whole idea behind this is to create something that's really broadband focused. It's all SIP. We don't care at the end of the day. What physical layer is in place. So whether you have kind of a traditional legacy broadband environment that you're trying to integrate, as well as the latest IP and optical stuff, it will work regardless of that. As long as there's a broadband connection, you'll get the service and support you would expect. Obviously, it's ideally suited for what Sam talked about. What's nice about it as well is we'll give you ways for this to integrate with an existing environment. So if you're a service provider out there and you got a legacy deployment from Metaswitch or a legacy deployment from Taqua, or you've got an existing Ribbon deployment, one of our C15s or something of that nature, and you're thinking, oh, how do I make all this work together? One of the things that we've done is integrated things like our Ribbon PSX, which is a centralized routing agent. So we can essentially glue together multiple networks and create a common platform that will all work across this broadband environment. And even with all this capability, we've also provided the ability to extend what's here. So for instance, we have our whole Ribbon Call Trust portfolio, which provides things like robocall and fraudulent calling mitigation. They can be layered on top of this and integrates in, again, because it's part of Ribbon VoiceSync is actually a combination of existing elements. That means that it integrates with all of Ribbon's existing assets as well. So it's easy for you all to be able to, to be able to support the requirements around robocall and fraud mitigation that just came out recently and just went into effect here at the end of the month. In addition, you can layer on top value-added services if you want to add things like contact center services, soft clients, call recording, all the other value-added services that you might add to a business environment that customers are willing to pay a little extra for, you can layer those into the solution as required. And I talked a little bit about the fact that this is cost effective. And one of the ways we've done that was made it super easy to buy. We have an initial configuration of roughly 1,000 users. We can show you how easily that prices out. And then you just add blocks of 100 users. And if you're in a situation where say, well, hey, time out, my network environment isn't that cookie cutter because I have this legacy system over here. I need to connect this over there. What about that? Well, of course, you can scale up pieces of the offer as well. So for instance, if you needed additional session border control connectivity to bring into a third-party network, you could license that separately. So we have a lot of kind of options for you to easily expand, but we made it cost effective. So for those of you out there who might be, delving into this part of the arena for the first time because if maybe you're the utility who's traditionally only provided electricity services and now you've got to figure out the broadband piece and the telco piece, this makes it really easy because we can package it up. You can tell us how many users you're hoping to support, and we can deliver a package that does all of that sort of in one configuration. And we think that this gives us a tremendous advantage over our competitors. One of the things that really makes Ribbon different than some of the people that you'll talk to out there is our primary business is delivering solutions to communication providers, broadband providers. Sam touched on this at the beginning, but we have over 500 today solution providers in the rural and regional market space. We also deliver a whole solution end-to-end, the call control, right, the security, the billing, as I mentioned, the robocalling, the broadband. And of course, it's all software-based, so you don't have to worry about hardware obsolescence. Easy to deploy it. You can pick the environment, the physical environment that you want to be on. You can pick the vendor that you want to be on. And you know that if, 5 years from now, Dell or somebody else, obsoletes the server, you can migrate over and everything will continue to work. And then the last piece of the equation is we know that from time to time, some of you may have looked at some of the cloud services and thought, hey, I'm just going to outsource this telecom stuff. Maybe it's not your area of expertise and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to touch it. But the reality is what we've done with Ribbon VoiceSync is created a cost-effective way for you to control your own destiny. Sure, there are cloud providers out there, but what you're going to recognize is that in that kind of environment, you don't control the services or the prices because you don't control the cost. And I know there's a few of you out there who've probably been involved in the cable TV business over the years, and you've seen how content providers have cranked up the price points. And when they do that, you have no choice but to pass that cost on. Your customers think that that's you raising the price, but the reality is your supplier has raised the price. And in many cases, you're actually taking a haircut on margins to try and control pricing because you don't know how you're going to deliver that content cost. The same potential exists with these cloud providers for telecom. You want to own the assets. You want to control what's offered. You want to control your price points so that you can control your margins. And we enable you to do that. So kind of a quick summary. Where do we stand? Well, I think hopefully you recognize sort of the totality of what Sam and I have discussed here, which is you can come to Ribbon. We can help you with a full IP optical solution environment, including the broadband aggregation, including this really, dynamic 5G mobile backhaul environment that we've seen. You can come to us for communication services, residential and business. We can also layer on top of that the tools for, nuisance call mitigation, for analytics and security. It's all part of the solution from end to end. And I got to tell you, it's all backed up by our support people. When you pick up the phone or you send an email and have a problem, it's our people on the other end of the line. And I know there's probably a few people on here who've dealt with our C15 support for years, and you understand how valuable that is because we're there to help You're not getting some third-party call center in the middle of nowhere who doesn't care who you are and why you're a customer. And so I think it really makes a difference in terms of your ability to please your customers as you move forward. And with that, we have this up here. You can reach out to Sam or myself. We'd be happy to help you. There's also a few web pages I tagged here. And I know I saw a few different questions come in, Sam. So maybe we'll take those quick and then we'll wrap it up.
I did see one of our listeners would love to personally have a robocall fraud mitigation solution. If we can help him with that.
Well, we can. It's busy in the robocall environment right now because the federal government is been, in the U.S. here anyways, has been busy putting in place some significant requirements around that. So there's a lot of service providers out there trying to make sure that they're compliant. Sam, I saw a couple of questions coming in earlier. One was I thought really interesting. I'll ask you this, which was last mile vendors. How do you sort of compare, our IP optical environment relative to some of the folks who have PON offers today? And, you can just, everybody here is going to have some sort of an access network. Why do I take the step of separating that out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we get that a lot. Is because, and I did show this on an earlier slide, but it's probably worth sort of reiterating. For small networks that don't grow very large in terms of capacity, or very large in terms of number of nodes, or very large in terms of distance and geography, you can kind of do that. You can use the access platform. They have some maybe built-in little backhaul functions, and you can use that in sort of an integrated way. And those platforms are very good at what they do, very good at access, of course. But when you start to build a more scalable backhaul network, just talking about speeds, the RDOF auction process specified a whole bunch of speed tiers that went all the way up to 500 meg to a gig. So the types of access speeds that the RDOF winners were promising are much more significant than what had been done earlier in rural markets. So just, the bandwidth is higher, the geography is broader, as I explained. You're trying to bring traffic back over a greater distance to hit the internet pop. It's just hard for access platforms that are great at access. It's hard for them to also embrace all those backhaul features. You may have heard the term God box, used from time to time in the industry, and that's the idea where maybe one box tries to do too many things and it winds up being a little bit compromised. So we see a lot of customers saying, okay, I did the integrated thing and that worked well 10 years ago, but now for this network, I need to think in terms of larger scale, and that's forcing me to consider access and backhaul as separate problem spaces.
And I guess one of my concerns when I hear you say this, my first thought in my head is, man, think about how much more bandwidth every business and every residence consumes than they did 5 or 7 years ago, and how all of that must stack up in the network. And I can't imagine that any of us could figure out what the real needs for bandwidth will be in 5 or 10 years from now. I mean, I don't see how it doesn't just continue to grow exponentially.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that with the pandemic, I was reading some figures the other day. I think the work from home population used to be around 5%. Now folks are looking at a work from home population on the order of 20%, kind of going forward. So it's just a huge leap that would not have happened. I know, in my home office, in my home, I used to be fine with, frankly, 15 meg of residential broadband bandwidth. And now, with what I do for work and things like this, 100 meg, 200 meg, that's what I really like. And I can tell the difference. My customers can tell the difference. It's a big deal.
I can tell you my wife can tell the difference, because when we're on something like this, she does not want to be her calls, which are also all video, impacted.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, you see a lot of that. The home offices are home offices plural.
Yes, exactly.
And schools and entertainment centers and all of that.
Right. Another question that came up for you was just, around the 5G space. You kind of touched on it, but just from a monetization perspective, sort of where do you see this going for the rural providers?
Yeah, a couple of different places. There are, rural operators who provide mobile services outright and sort of do their own backhaul. And then there are rural wireline only operators who actually derive a lot of revenue because they've got fiber out where, people like Verizon Wireless or T-Mobile don't have fiber, but they're delivering mobile services. So they're deriving their existence by providing a backhaul VPN kind of service. So so the monetization looks a little bit different depending on which camp you're in. But I think in either case, what's going to happen is the advanced services capabilities of 5G are going to come to the fore. But 4G is a little bit different. I think with, back in the days of 3G, you could kind of get your BlackBerry to work, and this thing called an iPhone was coming out, and it kind of worked. But with 4G, everybody said, okay, now I can get a smartphone to access the internet, and it's going to look great, and it has. And that was sort of an obvious application that people had their sights on. For 5G, it's actually very diverse, the types of application that the architecture supports. So what I see happening, right now people are just focusing on 5G for, higher speeds, or maybe even for marketing reasons, which are valid reasons. But I think as time marches on, some of these other types of applications, the low latency applications, the applications where you can, hook up millions of sensors and do things you've never been able to do before, people are going to figure that out. When people, sorry, that's such a long answer, but when people went to 4G to say, okay, smartphone, internet, yeah, I get it. Nobody thought of Uber, for example. And people are going to think of the next Uber-like thing here that only runs on 5G, and there's going to be a huge economic benefit to that. And having your transport network that can, fulfill that is going to be key to the monetization.
Yeah, maybe the analogy is the interstate highway, right? Which is, you build this highway out into what appears to be a farmland, and suddenly one day you find out that off of every exit, a whole series of different businesses have sprung up because they've recognized the value of the infrastructure where they happen to be.
Yeah, over time, the town kind of moves away from the town and moves out to the interstate.
Yeah. One good question we got just came in, which was, what's the advantage of using Ribbon for both IP optical and voice sync? And let me just start really with, I think, really 2 points. One is we have expertise in both areas, but I think the biggest value proposition is our ability to service and support those, particularly to our rural customers. As I said earlier, I think one of the big challenges that many of them face is that they don't have this innate expertise. They're not Verizon or somebody else or Comcast with 50,000 people who support things. So having somebody who actually understands who they are as a company and values their business is a big deal. And having somebody there to answer the phone or take the email, I think matters.
I'd agree with that. We see a lot of that in folks I talk to. The other thing that I hear, Greg, is service providers are looking at consolidating the quantity of vendors that they have to manage, and they really want to deal with fewer throats. The choking doesn't go away, but they want fewer throats to choke, right? So, yeah.
Well, all right. All right. I think that's our questions. I don't know, Lance, if you have any other comments, but I do know that we'll absolutely, people always ask, will we send out the slides? Is this recorded? Will I get a link? And the answer is always yes.
You are 100% correct, Greg. So yes, thanks everybody for attending today. Thank you guys for presenting. And yeah, we'll be sending an email follow-up later today with a link to the replay of the webinar with a link to the slides. On screen, as Greg has up there, you can obviously reach out to Sam and or Greg, take those documents. But of course, ribbon.com, you can get a hold of us there as well. You can also reply to that email that you see later today with any questions or comments you may have. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to help moving forward any way that we can. So thanks again. Be on the lookout for those emails today, and we will talk to you all next time. Have a great day.
Thank you.